Welcome back to Digging Deep, the podcast where we offer bereavement bites for time-pressed professionals and where we explore the trends, challenges, and stories that are shaping the future of the death care profession in Canada. I'm your host, Heather Kiteley. I'm the president and CEO of GFD and second-generation funeral director. And today we are recording live from the British Columbia Funeral Association AGM and Conference in Vancouver, BC. This is an incredible gathering of professionals that are dedicated to advancing the way that we support and serve families through loss. In this episode, we're tackling the critical issue that affects nearly every family. I would actually say it affects every family we serve. The gap between what Canadians think pre-planning a funeral will cost and what they actually cost. But before we jump in, if you're enjoying the Digging Deep podcast, please make sure to follow, leave us a comment, and share this episode with someone in your life who might find it valuable. Your support helps us to keep bringing these important conversations to the forefront. Joining me today is Daniel Baxter. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you. Good
Lovely
morning.
to have you here. Good morning. Dan was born in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and moved to the West Coast with his family at a very young age. Upon graduation from the University of BC with a degree in engineering, he began officer training with the Canadian Armed Forces, in which he served for 5 years, including 3.5 years under NATO command in Germany. Wow, that should be like a podcast in itself, I think. Upon release from the military, he joined the family fire safety and security business, where he worked primarily in customer service. This was followed by 12 years of consulting for various business clients. During a 6-month stint with a private funeral and cemetery provider, Dan discovered a profession where he could have a lasting impact on the families he served. This led to his decision to seek licensing as a funeral director, and along with his mentor Ian Elliott, they purchased Maple Ridge Funeral Chapel. Dan and his wife Marina have been married for 39 years, congratulations, and have 4 children. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you here. So today we're going to be talking about cost. Specifically, I wanted to sort of lead off with our research that states that half of Canadians know that prepaid funerals can lock in today's prices. So that's not a very high number, right? 50%. And nearly a quarter think that all funeral costs must be paid up front. So that just shows us there's a huge lack of knowledge just in the general public of how things can be taken care of. But before we dive into that,
Okay.
I'm going to deviate a little bit, because with your background, and you described yourself before we started as a rookie in funeral service, and I am long in the tooth in funeral service. So I think this is going to be a really interesting discussion. But how on earth did you transition to where you are today? And I know we talked a little bit about it in the intro, but I want to get into, like, what was it? What was the thing that happened in your life and in your experience that said, hey, this is what I want to be doing?
Yeah, it's actually a long answer, so I'll abbreviate it as much as I can. You know, people say, what did you do for a living? And I did a lot of different things. I've kind of been a bit of a serial entrepreneur, if you will. And I was at a stage where I was looking for something different. I'd been doing what I had been for the last 12 years or so, and it was business consulting. And I was looking for a change, and I was at a funeral for a friend of mine who died suddenly at age 42, dropped dead while he was on vacation. And I'm sitting in his funeral, and don't laugh, I heard a voice clear as day say, Dan, you need to look at funeral service.
I will not laugh, because I will tell you, and I've said this on the podcast before, the thing I hear the most from people in the profession is that it's a calling, even people who aren't super religious. So.
Okay, fair enough. So in my case, I did what any other person would do when they hear the voice of God. I ignored it for several years.
Yeah.
And
sensible.
Yeah, sensible thing to do. But you know, if God wants you doing something, he keeps at you. And for the first time in my life, I'd taken on another job and got fired. And I thought, oh, okay, a message is being sent to you. Yeah, so
rather abrupt.
So at that point, I then thought, okay, I need to take this seriously. And through a just sequence of events, fortuitous, if you will, just from my experience doing that consulting with that cemetery. I had met some people, and so I reached out to them at that point and met Ian Elliott, who eventually became my mentor for training, and then we were able to purchase Maple Ridge Funeral Chapel together.
And how many years has that been?
Purchased in 2021.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah, so very recent.
Yeah, right post-COVID though.
Post-COVID,
right?
and actually the deal closed during final exams, so it was a bit of a stressful time getting my license and buying a funeral home at the same time.
Wonderful. I think it's so cool how I have not heard yet that someone said, oh, I thought it would be a great financial decision. And, like when you think about why people decide they want to do something, the universal here is that, there's just this calling, this sense of wanting to help people. And I think that is one of the things that is amazing about our profession generally.
Yeah, I mean, I've said this many times. I wish I had found this profession sooner.
Yeah.
It is by far the most rewarding career I've had, and I'm not talking financially. I'm just talking in terms of how it makes you feel helping families at their worst, and just how appreciative they are of the work we do. So
I know that this podcast is not about that. We are not talking about, we're not speaking to those people who might be considering a career in funeral service, but I want to stop for a second and talk to those folks who might be listening, who are thinking about a career in funeral service, to say, like, I hope everyone heard that, right? It is like, when people are, especially young people, or people of any age, obviously, who are thinking about what it is that I want to do, that there is more than just, there's so much that funeral service has to give back. Even though it demands so much of us, there's so much that it has to give back to us.
Yeah, actually, we were talking with some colleagues yesterday about this a little bit, how, there's kind of a little bit of a lack of a better word, mistrust with our funeral profession. Maybe fear is part of that. They don't want to talk about death. Actually, we just did a trade show and we had a booth set up and people would walk by and go, oh, what do you, funeral, oh. So there is that kind of element.
That's not going to happen to me.
Yeah.
Right? I don't want to do that.
But when they need us, they really love us.
Yeah.
And
that's true.
That is the beauty of our profession.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I just love the universality of that. So we are talking today, though, about something very practical, which is cost. So let's talk a little bit about how that lack of, and we talked in a podcast earlier, Jason and I were talking about this, about how that lack of, a barrier to pre-need is this idea that they have to pay for everything all at once, right? And so I think that stops people from doing anything. And so then how does that barrier or that lack of awareness affect families' decisions when there is a loss and when they come in to see us?
I think the first thing we understand is that grief puts people in a very vulnerable state. And so if they don't have a clear sense of what things cost, or if they're coming up with this large sum and they think, oh my goodness, I've got to come up with this immediately, it really does add a lot of stress to an already very, very stressful situation.
Do you think that sort of leads to a little bit of initial distrust, right? Because people are feeling really vulnerable, they're coming in after someone has died, is there that sense of oh, I got to be careful now, right? That is like a barrier that you almost have to overcome when you're talking to families to help them reduce that fear, to say, hey, we're going to help you through this, and don't, I'm not here to try and talk you into a million things, right?
Right. Yeah, a good point. I mean, one of the first things I say to a family during an arrangement is this: we're going to talk about a lot of options today. Please don't feel any pressure to take any of them. Yeah. I'm just letting you know what's available, unless it, in case it's something you hadn't thought of before.
Yeah, because you wouldn't want people to come back later and say, how come you didn't tell me about that thing?
Exactly right. Especially with cremation. If I know on a previous podcast you talked about things like diamonds and fingerprints and all that thing.
50 million things that you can have with cremation.
And once cremation happens, those opportunities are lost. So, the worst thing is someone to have regret after the fact, and there's nothing we can do about that.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
So we need to be upfront with people for sure. And also cost can cause people to, maybe can result in guilt because they can't afford what they knew mom and dad wanted. And so, it certainly is a factor.
Yeah, that is such an interesting piece, right? And I think it speaks to, obviously it speaks to the importance of pre-planning because so much of this can be solved beforehand.
Sure.
But that sense of and to imagine you have no exposure to the business, you've never had to plan a funeral before, and we know that like 40% of the time death is sudden and unexpected. It's like half the time people are coming in to see you, they didn't plan to come in and see you when they woke up that morning, right?
A lot more than half.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even sometimes I think that when a death is expected, other than MAID, when someone is sick, there is still that sense when it happens of, oh my God, like that feeling. I think it's that feeling of finality, that feeling of surprise that happens, even though the death is expected. When it actually happens, you're just like, right? You're for those who are listening, I think I should explain that my face was just kind of like one of confusion, right? Like you're just thinking like, I don't even know. Who am I going to meet with? What are you going to be like? What are you going to do to me when I come in, right? I think that the fact that people are coming in from that place, meeting with funeral professionals, and most of the time leaving with a bit of a sense of relief or a sense of like, oh, that was not exactly what I thought it was going to be. Would you agree with that statement, or would you feel that a lot of times people leave like, oh?
No, I would say I've got two things to say about that.
Yep.
The first one is more often than not, the comment is along the lines of, oh, that wasn't so bad. You made that easy.
Mm-hmm. Even in an at-need situation.
Even in an at-need situation. Yeah. But I would also counter that with the number of times I've sat across families so relieved that mom and dad had pre-planned.
If only you could get people to test drive that experience.
It's so true, because all the decisions have already been made. Everything's already paid for. All they really have to do is sign a couple documents, and it's done. So big difference.
Don't you find that changes, that changes the relationship that family has with you, right? But it also changes the relationship that they have with each other.
For sure.
Because all of a sudden they're not having to agree, especially if you have children, even grown children, right? It can be challenging sometimes because of that sense of maybe one child might want that casket that the other child who's the executor knows that they can't afford, and you're trying to navigate all of that. And I think that's the piece that is hard for us to explain to people. Mm-hmm. That sense of like, it's not like pre-need is good, not just because it's good for the relationship between the family and the funeral home, but it's good for the relationship between the family to take those decisions
very good
away,
point.
Right?
Yeah.
Because when you are faced with a loss and you're having to, try to manage all of those different personalities, because every family has them, right? I think it's just having to make those decisions that don't even really help anything, right? Like the logistical decisions that really don't change how someone's going to move forward with their loss, or how they're going to celebrate the person, or how they're going to remember mom, and that yet they're caught up in those things.
Yeah, it's not uncommon to sit across from a family and they don't even know if mom wanted burial or cremation. Which I will say a plug, it's important to have a will, because that is one of the things that's covered in a will.
Yes. Hopefully.
Yes, generally.
Hopefully, yes.
And even what people may not know is even within the law, a family is expected to follow the disposition the family asked for if it's in the will.
Right.
And in the absence of the will, if it's in a pre-planned contract.
Yeah.
So that's written right in the law.
Yeah.
And I think that's because the law recognized there is these situations that can get ugly if people don't agree on what's wanted.
And cost can be one of those things that can become ugly between families, for sure.
Yeah.
Obviously, discussions about money when someone dies are really difficult discussions for people to have. But I think you've touched on something here that I want to talk a little bit more about, and that is that issue of disposition, right? Because there can be not just disagreements about burial or cremation within families, but there can be very real, very painful, different divergencies or ideas around that could be cultural in nature, could be religious in nature. So I'm thinking specifically of situations where, somebody is married and they're a young person who passes away and they're married and they've always wanted to be cremated and their spouse says, yes, they're going to be cremated, but they come from a family where cremation to that person's parents, cremation is something that is like unheard of, or goes against their religious values, or they just can't bring their mind to come to terms with that. And when you have everything prearranged, of course, that makes everything a little bit different. But when you don't, and you're just coming in completely unprepared, right? How often would you say, so if you're looking at your work that you do with families, with your self-confessed rookiness, in this short time that you have been, and you've been in this pretty much post-COVID, right? What would you say is the biggest challenge as it relates to costs that people are trying to deal with at the time of need? We'll get to prearrangement in a second, but.
Yeah, well, I think, and it still kind of stems back to your first question, is how do those, kind of emotions are people dealing with? And the other one is probably guilt as well, because they weren't prepared and the costs are far more than they can afford.
Yeah. And
so they end up settling for something less expensive than they knew mom or dad would have wanted, simply because they couldn't afford it. And of course there's some misconceptions that, there's these different death benefits. Maybe that's going to cover it.
Right.
Maybe there's other government subsidies that will cover it. Maybe funeral homes are all charities and they'll do things for free.
Right.
Another misconception I think that factors into this is the idea of life insurance. Well, I don't need a pre-plan because mom and dad, they've got life insurance.
Mm-hmm.
But what they don't realize is life insurance can take, on the best of days, 5-6 weeks to pay out.
Yeah.
And that, again, assumes there's no one contesting any of the issues, or, there was health issues that weren't disclosed. There's a whole number of factors that can delay that.
And it assumes that the beneficiary of that life insurance policy is going to agree to use that money for the funeral, right? Because I've seen that so many times that, where the policy will pay out to, one of the children, or sometimes the policy will pay out equally to all of the children. And even though mom intended for that policy to be used for her funeral, it's divided amongst all of her children because she wanted to be fair. And, one of the children says, well, mom always told me that she wanted me to go to Florida to remember her by, or something along those lines, right? There's just so many different perceptions that people have, and also different reactions when someone dies and money becomes involved, right?
Yeah. And
I think it's a really important thing that you just brought forward, that piece about people thinking, oh, I have a life insurance policy, so everything's done.
Yeah, and again, what people don't understand is now I can't speak for all funeral homes, but I can say as a general rule, when there is no pre-plan and no government subsidies, so they're paying for it, payment is required up front.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah, and there's a really good reason for that. If you sell someone a car, you can always repossess the car. Yeah. If you sell someone a service in their home, you can always, put a lien on the house. But once you've buried someone, the funeral home has no recourse.
Yeah.
And so, as a general rule, funeral homes do require payment up front. So if you're looking at, for some people, whether it's $10,000 or $1,000, it doesn't matter. It might as well be $100,000. They don't have the money.
Exactly.
And so what are they going to do?
Or they can't access it right away. They might have it, but they can't access it.
Or that,
right?
Yeah. So, so that's why, again, going back to the topic of pre-planning, that's why pre-planning is so important. Coming back to that issue of payment up front, funeral homes don't generally offer payment plans.
Yeah.
But when you
when someone's died, right?
Right, because we want all our funds up front before services are rendered.
And there's so many costs that funeral homes have to outlay immediately, right? They have nothing to do with their own costs that people don't necessarily consider that.
Sure. Yeah. Casket would be a good example.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
So the great thing about pre-planning, of course, is you can pay over time. So even, the person who's pre-planning isn't facing big upfront costs.
Yeah.
There's flexible plans, 1 year, 5 year, 10, 15 year payout plans.
Yeah.
And there's an added benefit as well, is when you pay over years, there's an insurance component.
Right.
So if you die before the end of the term, you don't have to pay the rest of the payments. So
Yeah.
more savings are, to the estate than would otherwise.
And
be.
the fact that plan or that insurance or prepayment is tied to a plan, right?
Exactly.
Which is the difference between just going out and saying, oh, I'm just going to get an insurance policy.
Exactly
When
right.
you have the money tied to the plan, that's kind of where the magic happens for people. Right?
Yeah, and those type of insurance plans aren't indexed to anything,
Yeah.
whereas with a pre-plan, your fees are locked in at today's prices. Even if you're around for another 2 or 20 years,
Yeah.
prices will not go up.
All you got to do is pick up the phone. That's what I used to tell people.
Yeah.
When they would walk out the door, I'd say, hey, the only thing you need to do next is just tell your family who to call, right?
Exactly
and all
right.
they have to do is pick up the phone.
Yeah.
So we are nearing the end of our podcast. So what
Okay.
I want to talk about quickly is, do you have any thoughts about how the sector can work together to advocate for more discussion around costs? Because I would say in my experience over the last number of decades that talking about funeral costs is not something that funeral homes like to do, right? We just, we are not comfortable talking. We'll talk forever about the service and everything that we provide and all of these wonderful things. But when it comes to the nitty gritty of cost, we are, a little bit hesitant. So what do you think needs to change there?
Yeah,
With
great
your
question. So, I mean, my opinion on that is we should be completely transparent with costs. So, our funeral home, for years, we publish all of our prices on our website so people can make informed decisions. We want people to, not just find the cheapest price. Of course, that's not always the factor, but at least know what to expect
Yeah.
when they step into the funeral home.
Yeah, so they already have a sense, right?
Yeah, anytime. Our website, loud and proud, our prices are right there for anybody to
Loud
review.
and
So
proud, I love that.
yeah, so I think that's step one, is
Yeah.
to be transparent about that, and let's not nickel and dime people. Let's let them know that what you see is what you get, and that comes back to my original comment. When I tell them what's available, all those options are also priced ahead of time, but I don't want people to feel pressure ever to take any of them. So again, stepping back to that, transparency is key. I think maybe get involved with other organizations that people trust, whether it's hospice or memorial society or holding seminars, even public seminars, so people can in advance kind of understand before that time comes what costs to expect.
Yeah, I think that's so key, that transparency. Not from, I don't look at it from the sense of, oh, we're hiding anything. I look at it from the sense that the more transparent we are, the more educated people can be, right? And education is power,
Yeah.
especially for people who feel vulnerable at a time like this. So if they have access to all of that information, including cost, well in advance, which is, again, one of the wonderful things about pre-arrangement. But even if they haven't done that, before they come into the funeral home knowing, okay, this is, I'm not going to get any surprises here, right? This is what I can expect when I go in.
Yeah, and the regulation in our province does require that funeral homes make price lists readily available, but many people don't want to walk into a funeral home to get that price list, which is why I think technology...
many people don't want to walk into a funeral home anyway.
Well,
right?
ever.
Yeah,
You're right.
like, oh, no, thank you.
But again, I think that's why using technology like your websites to make that available is pretty important.
Yeah. That's an awesome place to end our podcast.
All
so
right.
I just want to take a minute to thank you so much, Dan, for this great conversation. And even though you're a rookie to funeral service, I'm excited to see how you're going to change things and just what your leadership will represent over the next number of years in funeral service. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Heather. Appreciate being here.
Yeah, it's just been such a pleasure and an honor for me. Thank you. As we've discussed today, when families are caught off guard by costs, it can add uncertainty and stress to an already painful time. And that's something that we all in our profession have the power to change. By promoting transparency, empathy, and education around pricing and all of the wonderful things that we do for folks, we can help families feel more confident, informed, and supported as they make their end-of-life decisions.
True.
If you have found today's discussion valuable, please be sure to follow, leave a comment, and share our podcast with your colleagues or any friends or family that you might think would find it helpful. Your support helps us to continue to bring important conversations like this to the profession and to the public. Until next time, I'm Heather Kiteley. Keep on digging deep.